The greatest mistake a person can make is believing they already know another person's worth before hearing a single word they have to say. The first rays of Saturday morning sunlight stretched across the quiet streets of Cedar Falls, Virginia, where family-owned businesses unlocked their doors and neighbors exchanged familiar greetings before beginning another peaceful weekend. Nothing about the town suggested that before the afternoon arrived, one ordinary encounter would quietly become the story everyone would remember for years to come. A black man drove an older dark blue pickup truck through the center of town before turning into a quiet residential neighborhood, lined with maple trees and neatly kept front yards. His name was Marcus Bennett. He wore a simple navy jacket, blue jeans, and comfortable walking shoes that revealed nothing about the extraordinary responsibility he carried every day. There was no official vehicle, no security escort, and no sign that he occupied one of the highest positions in the United States military. He had traveled nearly 200 miles for one reason alone. A lifelong friend who had served beside him decades earlier was finally retiring after an honorable military career, and Marcus had promised he would never miss that celebration. Keeping promises mattered to him more than convenience. After parking along the curb, Marcus stepped out carrying a modest gift bag and slowly walked toward the house where colorful banners already welcomed family and friends. Before reaching the front gate, he noticed an elderly woman struggling to carry several heavy grocery bags from her car. Without hesitation, he crossed the sidewalk and politely asked whether she would like some help. She accepted with a grateful smile, and within moments Marcus had carried every bag safely to her porch before wishing her a wonderful day. The woman thanked him warmly, never imagining that the quiet stranger standing before her had spent decades leading thousands of men and women dedicated to serving their country. As Marcus continued toward his friend's home, a patrol vehicle slowly entered the neighborhood. Officer Daniel Harper noticed the unfamiliar pickup truck parked along the street and mentioned it to his partner, Officer Ethan Brooks. Recent reports of suspicious activity had encouraged officers to pay closer attention to unfamiliar vehicles entering residential neighborhoods, and Harper decided a brief conversation would help clarify why the visitor was there. The patrol vehicle stopped near the curb, and both officers stepped outside with calm professionalism. Marcus immediately stopped walking and greeted them respectfully with a friendly smile. Harper explained that they were conducting a routine inquiry and asked whether Marcus lived in the neighborhood. Marcus answered politely that he was visiting an old military friend for a retirement celebration and gladly offered to identify himself. As he slowly reached for his wallet exactly as instructed, a worn leather credential holder and an old challenge coin briefly became visible before slipping back beneath several ordinary business cards. Harper barely noticed either item. To him, they appeared no different from the keepsakes many veterans carried throughout their lives. Marcus handed over his driver's license without hesitation and waited patiently while the officers examined it. His posture remained relaxed, his voice calm, and his expression steady. He asked no special favors and mentioned no titles. Across the street, an elderly veteran walking his dog suddenly looked toward Marcus with unmistakable recognition. He paused for a moment as though trying to remember where he had seen the familiar face before. Just then, a large delivery truck turned onto the narrow street, temporarily blocking his path. By the time the truck passed, Officer Harper had already asked Marcus if he would mind answering a few more questions, and although Marcus quietly agreed without complaint, neither officer realized that the smallest decision they made during the next few minutes would soon reach far beyond the peaceful streets of Cedar Falls. Marcus Bennett remained exactly where he stood, his hands relaxed at his sides while Officer Daniel Harper studied the driver's license with careful attention. Every detail appeared ordinary. The address matched. The vehicle registration, the photograph matched the man standing before him, and nothing immediately suggested that the visitor posed any threat. Even so, Harper continued asking additional questions. Marcus answered each one with calm respect, explaining that he had driven from Northern Virginia to attend the retirement celebration of a lifelong friend who had completed more than 30 years of military service. He even mentioned that several veterans from different parts of the country would be arriving later that morning. His explanation sounded clear, consistent, and unhurried. Officer Ethan Brooks quietly observed the conversation without interrupting. Something about Marcus seemed different from most people he encountered during routine field interviews. There was no irritation in his voice, no nervous movement, and no attempt to argue. Instead, Marcus listened carefully before answering every question with measured confidence. Years of discipline seemed visible in the smallest details, from the way he maintained eye contact to the way he waited patiently whenever an officer spoke. Harper returned the driver's license but politely asked whether Marcus carried any additional identification. Marcus nodded and slowly opened his wallet once again. As he removed another card holder, the worn challenge coin slipped briefly into view before resting against his hand. Brooks noticed the unusual emblem stamped into the metal. It was unlike any military souvenir he had seen before, but before he could ask about it, Marcus carefully placed the coin back inside his wallet without drawing attention to it. Harper explained that recent neighborhood complaints required officers to verify unfamiliar visitors whenever circumstances seemed unusual. Marcus acknowledged the explanation with a respectful nod and replied that protecting a community required careful observation, but earning the community's trust required treating every person with fairness. His words were calm rather than critical, and Harper accepted the response without argument. Across the street, the elderly veteran finally managed to continue walking after the delivery truck cleared the narrow road. The moment he looked directly at Marcus again, recognition spread across his face. He immediately changed direction and began crossing toward the officers, but a neighbor stopped him for a brief conversation about the retirement celebration taking place only a few houses away. The unexpected delay lasted less than a minute, yet it prevented him from reaching Marcus before the situation moved forward. Harper then asked whether Marcus would mind accompanying the officers to the station so they could complete a few routine verification steps and avoid interrupting the gathering later in the day. Marcus calmly asked whether he was under arrest or simply being asked to assist with the inquiry. Harper answered that he was being detained temporarily while the remaining questions were resolved and assured him that cooperation would help everyone finish the process more quickly. Marcus quietly agreed. He explained that he respected lawful procedures and hoped to arrive at his friend's celebration as soon as possible. Nearby neighbors watched with growing curiosity as Marcus walked peacefully beside the officers toward the patrol vehicle. No raised voices filled the air, and no one witnessed resistance of any kind. The elderly veteran finally reached the sidewalk just as the patrol vehicle pulled away. He watched it disappear around the corner before quietly shaking his head. Looking toward the decorated house where friends and family were beginning to gather, he softly whispered that the officers had no idea who had just left the neighborhood, and that before the day ended, the entire town would understand how much they had overlooked. The patrol vehicle moved quietly through the streets of Cedar Falls, while Marcus Bennett watched familiar neighborhoods pass beyond the window with calm, thoughtful eyes. He had made this drive many times over the years, although never under circumstances quite like these. Even so, his breathing remained steady, and his expression never changed. Officer Daniel Harper focused on the road while Officer Ethan Brooks occasionally glanced toward the quiet passenger seated behind them. During years of patrol duty, Brooks had encountered people who became angry, frightened, defensive, or impatient during routine police encounters. Marcus displayed none of those reactions. Instead, he sat comfortably with his hands resting on his lap, looking out the window as church bells echoed softly across the town. After several minutes of silence, Brooks finally asked whether Marcus had served in the military. Marcus smiled politely before answering that military service had shaped much of his life and taught him that patience often solved problems more effectively than arguments ever could. Harper heard the exchange but remained focused on driving. To him, the answer explained very little. Cedar Falls was home to many veterans, and military experience alone did not make someone unusual. When they arrived at the police station shortly before noon, Marcus stepped out of the patrol vehicle without hesitation and thanked the officers for opening the door. Inside the station, the atmosphere reflected an ordinary weekend shift. A dispatcher answered incoming calls while deputies completed paperwork behind the front counter. Visitors entered and left the lobby with routine questions about permits, reports, and neighborhood concerns. Marcus quietly waited where Officer Harper asked him to stand. He neither complained about the delay nor questioned the process. Harper explained that they simply needed to verify several remaining details before concluding the encounter. Marcus nodded respectfully and replied that he understood the importance of following proper procedures. He then made one simple request. He asked whether, after the initial administrative process was complete, he could make a single telephone call. Harper immediately agreed because the request seemed completely reasonable. While Marcus waited, Brooks carefully documented his personal belongings according to department procedure. As he briefly handled the worn challenge coin that had slipped from Marcus's wallet earlier, one of the senior dispatchers happened to notice the distinctive insignia engraved across its surface. She paused for a moment, convinced she had seen that emblem during a regional emergency coordination conference involving senior military officials several years earlier. Before she could remember exactly where, another incoming emergency call demanded her full attention. At nearly the same moment, the elderly veteran from the neighborhood hurried through the station entrance. Slightly out of breath, he politely asked whether a man named Marcus Bennett had recently been brought inside. Harper acknowledged that Marcus was assisting with routine questions and assured the veteran that everything remained professional. The veteran looked toward Marcus with unmistakable respect before quietly telling Harper that careful verification would be important because the quiet visitor standing in the lobby had earned extraordinary respect throughout the military community. Harper thanked him for the information but believed standard procedures would answer every remaining question. A few minutes later, the dispatcher informed Marcus that the telephone was available. Marcus thanked her warmly, lifted the receiver, and calmly requested that the call be connected through the Department of Defense Secure Operator. He spoke only a few measured sentences before ending the conversation with a simple expression of appreciation. No one nearby heard anything remarkable, yet within moments the dispatcher noticed an authenticated priority notification appearing across the secure communication system, and although no one inside the station understood what was about to happen, the quiet rhythm of an ordinary Saturday had already begun to change. Marcus Bennett gently returned the telephone receiver to its cradle and offered a quiet word of thanks to the dispatcher before stepping back to the place where Officer Daniel Harper had originally asked him to wait. Nothing about his expression suggested urgency. He folded his hands comfortably in front of him and looked through the station windows toward the bright afternoon sky, knowing that his friend's retirement celebration had already begun. Even so, there was no frustration in his face. Years of military service had taught him that unexpected moments tested character far more than carefully planned ones. Around him, the Cedar Falls Police Department continued operating as though it were another ordinary Saturday. Deputies answered routine questions from local residents, telephones rang with neighborhood concerns, and officers completed reports at their desks. Only the senior dispatcher seemed distracted. Seconds after connecting Marcus through the Department of Defense Secure Operator, an authenticated priority notification appeared on her secure communications terminal. She read the message once, then again, before quietly printing the document and carrying it directly into the office of the watch commander. Officer Ethan Brooks noticed the unusual sequence immediately. Normally, administrative notifications remained on the dispatcher's screen until convenient. This time, she moved with careful purpose. A minute later, the watch commander emerged from his office holding the printed notice with a noticeably more serious expression. He did not raise his voice or create unnecessary attention. Instead, he quietly asked Officer Harper whether the visitor had completed a secure telephone call only moments earlier. Harper confirmed that Marcus had requested permission through normal procedure and that the call had lasted less than a minute. The commander nodded thoughtfully before returning to his office and placing another call through an official government directory. Brooks exchanged a puzzled glance with Harper. Neither officer understood why a simple identification inquiry had suddenly attracted command-level attention. Meanwhile, the elderly veteran who had followed the patrol vehicle remained seated quietly in the reception area. He watched Marcus with calm respect before walking over and asking whether he was concerned about missing the retirement ceremony. Marcus smiled warmly and answered that celebrating a lifelong friendship mattered far more than arriving exactly on time. He added that good people would always understand circumstances beyond anyone's control. The veteran simply nodded, recognizing the same humility he had witnessed throughout Marcus's military career many years earlier. Outside the station, two dark government sport utility vehicles entered Cedar Falls without emergency lights or unnecessary attention. They obeyed every traffic signal, blended naturally into the afternoon traffic, and eventually turned toward the police department parking lot. Most people passing nearby assumed they belonged to another federal agency conducting routine business. Inside, the watch commander's office telephone rang once again. This conversation lasted only a few moments, yet when he stepped back into the lobby, every officer immediately sensed that something significant had changed. He instructed available supervisors to report to the reception area and quietly asked that all routine administrative activity continue without interruption. There was no panic, only disciplined preparation. Marcus remained exactly where he had been standing since the beginning of the encounter, showing the same patience and quiet confidence that had defined every moment of the day. Then the front entrance opened, and several professionally dressed officials, accompanied by senior uniformed military personnel, stepped inside carrying sealed authorization folders. No one announced their purpose. No one raised their voice. Yet the respectful silence that filled the station made one thing unmistakably clear. Whatever answer had arrived through the Department of Defense was about to change the entire direction of the day. The officials who entered the Cedar Falls Police Department carried themselves with the quiet confidence of people accustomed to operating without unnecessary attention. Their polished shoes echoed softly across the lobby floor as they approached the watch commander, who stepped forward to greet them. The senior officer introduced himself as Major General William Harlan before presenting official identification, along with a sealed authorization packet bearing Department of Defense credentials. The watch commander accepted the documents respectfully and began reviewing each page with careful attention. Officer Daniel Harper watched from several feet away, unable to understand why a routine detention had suddenly drawn the attention of senior military leadership. Officer Ethan Brooks noticed that every page contained multiple authentication markings rarely seen outside federal operations. Neither officer spoke. The room itself seemed to understand that something extraordinary was unfolding. Marcus Bennett remained exactly where he had been standing throughout the encounter. His posture never changed. He greeted Major General Harlan with a simple nod of professional courtesy, but made no effort to explain who he was or influence anyone's opinion. The elderly veteran sitting nearby quietly smiled as he watched the two men acknowledge one another with unmistakable familiarity. Years earlier, he had learned that the strongest military leaders rarely announced their importance because their conduct always spoke before their titles did. Major General Harlan patiently waited while the watch commander completed every verification step. Once the final document had been examined, he calmly explained that the Department of the Army had confirmed the identity of the individual currently inside the station through official military liaison channels. He emphasized that Marcus Bennett had been traveling in a personal capacity to attend the retirement celebration of a longtime friend and that no security concern or criminal investigation existed regarding his presence in Cedar Falls. Harper slowly looked toward Marcus, replaying every moment from the neighborhood encounter in his mind. Nothing about Marcus's behavior had been confrontational. Every instruction had been followed. Every question had been answered respectfully. Brooks quietly glanced toward the worn challenge coin resting with Marcus's documented personal belongings and finally understood why its insignia had seemed unlike anything he had ever encountered. It had never been an ordinary keepsake. The watch commander received one final secure communication confirming that additional administrative guidance would follow immediately. He thanked Major General Harlan for his cooperation before gathering the available supervisors near the reception area. The dispatcher noticed that conversations throughout the building had nearly stopped. Deputies who moments earlier had been completing paperwork now watched silently from their desks. Even visitors waiting in the lobby sensed that an ordinary Saturday had become something far more significant. Major General Harlan then turned toward Marcus with visible respect and quietly asked whether he was ready for the formal confirmation to proceed. Marcus answered with the same calm voice that had remained unchanged since the beginning of the day. He replied that proper procedures existed for a reason and that everyone present should simply continue following them. Those few words impressed Officer Harper more than any display of authority could have done. Here stood a man who possessed remarkable responsibility, yet he showed no interest in using it for personal advantage. The watch commander closed the authorization folder, took a slow breath, and faced every officer gathered inside the station. He announced that the Department of Defense had fully verified the visitor's identity, and that the next instruction required immediate compliance under established military protocol. A profound silence settled across the room because no one present yet knew the name that was about to be spoken, only that the truth waiting on the next page would permanently change the way every person inside the Cedar Falls Police Department remembered this day. The watch commander slowly lowered the authorization folder before looking directly toward Marcus Bennett. The quiet inside the Cedar Falls Police Department became almost complete. Every deputy, dispatcher, and supervisor waited for the explanation that would finally answer the questions that had followed the visitor since his arrival. Major General William Harlan stepped forward with calm professionalism and addressed the room in a steady voice. He confirmed that the Department of Defense had completed every required verification through official military liaison channels, and that the individual standing patiently in the reception area was General Marcus Bennett, a serving 4-star general of the United States Army. For a brief moment, no one moved. Officer Daniel Harper felt the words settle over him as he replayed every decision he had made since first noticing the unfamiliar pickup truck parked along the quiet residential street. Officer Ethan Brooks looked toward the worn challenge coin resting beside Marcus's documented personal belongings and suddenly understood why its insignia had seemed so distinctive. It had never represented an ordinary military unit. Major General Harlan then turned toward Marcus, stood at attention, and rendered a precise military salute. Without hesitation, Marcus returned the salute with the same disciplined professionalism before extending his hand in greeting. The exchange lasted only seconds, yet it transformed the atmosphere inside the station more completely than any speech could have done. The watch commander acknowledged the authenticated directive that had accompanied the verification package and respectfully instructed every sworn officer present to observe the required military protocol. Chairs moved quietly across the floor as officers stood at attention. The room remained silent while the formal recognition was completed with dignity and respect. Marcus accepted the moment without pride or celebration. His expression remained exactly as calm as it had been throughout the entire encounter. Once the protocol concluded, he immediately thanked everyone present for maintaining professionalism during a situation that had developed in unexpected ways. His first concern was not his own position or authority. Instead, he asked whether the officers had been able to continue serving the community without interruption while the verification process was taking place. The question surprised nearly everyone in the room. Officer Harper stepped forward and sincerely apologized for the misunderstanding, explaining that he had believed he was following routine procedures designed to protect the neighborhood. Marcus listened without interruption before replying that responsible public service often required difficult decisions made with limited information. He explained that procedures existed to protect communities, but fairness depended upon remembering that every individual deserved patience, courtesy, and an open mind before conclusions were reached. There was no accusation in his voice and no desire to embarrass anyone. Major General Harlan quietly observed the exchange before remarking that General Bennett had earned the respect of countless service members over many years not simply because of his rank, but because he consistently demonstrated the same humility whether speaking to a new recruit or a senior commander. The watch commander personally returned Marcus's wallet, driver's license, and challenge coin before offering another sincere apology on behalf of the department. Marcus accepted his belongings with a warm smile and thanked the officers for their willingness to complete every step according to established procedures. He then glanced toward the clock, smiled gently, and remarked that if they did not mind, he still hoped to arrive in time to congratulate an old friend whose retirement celebration had brought him to Cedar Falls in the first place. As the tension finally lifted from the room, everyone present understood that the most remarkable part of the day was not discovering the extraordinary rank carried by the quiet visitor, but witnessing how genuine authority revealed itself through patience, humility, and unwavering respect for every person he encountered. General Marcus Bennett thanked every officer individually before preparing to leave the Cedar Falls Police Department. There was no triumph in his voice and no desire to prolong a moment that had already taught everyone present more than enough. Officer Daniel Harper walked beside him toward the station entrance, still carrying the weight of everything that had unfolded during the past hour. He admitted that throughout his career he had believed experience alone allowed him to judge situations quickly. Standing beside Marcus now, he realized that confidence without humility could easily become a barrier to seeing the full truth. Marcus listened quietly before offering a gentle smile. He explained that every profession carried enormous responsibility, whether someone wore a police badge, a military uniform, or ordinary work clothes. The greatest challenge was remembering that every person deserved to be treated with dignity before assumptions shaped the outcome. Harper nodded slowly, recognizing that the lesson extended far beyond a single encounter. Major General William Harlan joined them. Outside beneath the bright afternoon sky, where the government vehicles remained parked without ceremony. He informed Marcus that transportation had been arranged if needed, but Marcus politely declined. He pointed toward his older pickup truck, now returned to him exactly as it had been documented earlier. He remarked that the truck had carried him faithfully for many years and saw no reason to abandon it simply because circumstances had briefly become unusual. Harlan laughed warmly, saying that Marcus had always remained the same man regardless of rank or responsibility. Nearby, Officer Ethan Brooks quietly approached with the worn challenge coin that had become one of the earliest clues everyone had overlooked. Before handing it back, he admitted that he had sensed the coin represented something significant but never imagined its true importance. Marcus accepted it carefully and replied that objects themselves possessed very little meaning unless they reminded people of values worth protecting. He explained that the coin represented trust earned over decades rather than authority granted by promotion. Brooks thanked him sincerely, promising that he would never again ignore the quiet details that revealed a person's character. At that moment, the elderly veteran from the neighborhood stepped outside after speaking briefly with the watch commander. The moment Marcus saw him, his face brightened with genuine happiness. The two old friends embraced warmly before laughing about how life continued finding unexpected ways to test patience. The veteran joked that he had nearly reached the officers in time to prevent the entire misunderstanding, but the delivery truck had chosen the perfect moment to block the road. Marcus smiled and answered that perhaps the delay had allowed everyone to learn something valuable that otherwise might never have happened. Officer Harper heard those words and realized that Marcus truly believed them. Instead of seeing embarrassment, Marcus saw opportunity. Instead of carrying resentment, he carried perspective. Before leaving, Harper asked one final question. He wondered how someone trusted with such extraordinary responsibility managed to remain so calm while being misunderstood. Marcus looked across the quiet streets of Cedar Falls before answering that leadership was never measured by how people treated you on your best day. Leadership was measured by how you chose to treat others on their most uncertain day. Those simple words settled deeply into every heart standing nearby. As Marcus climbed into his pickup truck and started the engine, Officer Harper understood that the greatest lesson of his career had not come from a training manual or classroom. It had come from a quiet man who never introduced himself by rank because he believed true character should always speak first, leaving titles to arrive only after respect had already been earned. The afternoon sun rested gently above Cedar Falls as General Marcus Bennett guided his old pickup truck through familiar neighborhood streets toward the retirement celebration he had promised never to miss. The events at the police station already felt strangely distant, replaced by the quiet satisfaction of finally keeping a commitment that had begun decades earlier. When he turned into the driveway, laughter drifted across the yard where American flags moved softly in the warm breeze and several generations of military families gathered beneath large oak trees. Long tables filled with homemade food stretched across the lawn while children played nearby, without realizing that an extraordinary story had unfolded only a few miles away. The moment Marcus stepped out of his truck carrying the same modest gift bag he had packed that morning, retired Sergeant First Class Thomas Walker looked toward the driveway and immediately smiled. Without hesitation, Thomas crossed the yard and embraced his longtime friend with genuine warmth. He laughed and joked that Marcus had always found a memorable way to arrive at every important occasion. Marcus smiled quietly and answered that life occasionally preferred unexpected schedules. Neither man felt any need to discuss rank or titles. Their friendship had been built long before either carried significant responsibility. Family members welcomed Marcus with sincere appreciation, introducing him to grandchildren who had only heard stories about the men who had served together years earlier. Marcus listened carefully as each child spoke about school, sports, and future dreams, encouraging them with the same patience he had shown throughout the entire day. Nearby veterans gradually recognized him, yet none rushed forward seeking attention. Instead, they greeted him naturally, respecting the humility that had always defined his character. A few minutes later, Officer Daniel Harper and Officer Ethan Brooks quietly arrived after completing the remaining administrative work at the station. They had not been invited by military officials, nor had anyone instructed them to attend. Both simply believed that finishing the day with honesty mattered more than pretending nothing had happened. Harper approached Thomas first, explained why they had come, and asked whether interrupting the celebration for only a moment would be acceptable. Thomas smiled kindly before inviting both officers to join everyone for lunch. When Marcus noticed the officers approaching, he greeted them with the same calm smile they had first seen that morning. There was no trace of resentment, only quiet respect. Harper thanked Marcus once again for the grace he had shown during an uncomfortable situation and admitted that the experience had already changed the way he intended to approach future encounters. Marcus replied that every profession offered opportunities to become better, provided people possessed the courage to learn instead of becoming defensive. Several veterans standing nearby nodded in quiet agreement. The conversation soon shifted away from the morning's misunderstanding and toward shared stories of service, family, and community. Laughter gradually replaced uncertainty as police officers, military veterans, neighbors, and children gathered around the same tables without barriers separating one group from another. Watching those conversations unfold, Thomas softly remarked that perhaps the most meaningful victory of the day was not that the truth had finally been recognized, but that understanding had replaced assumption before lasting harm could take root. Marcus looked across the peaceful gathering and quietly agreed, believing that communities became strongest when respect arrived before judgment, because every person deserved to be seen for the content of their character long before anyone learned the title they carried. As the evening sky settled over Cedar Falls, the last guests slowly gathered their belongings while children chased one another across the quiet lawn and neighbors exchanged warm farewells beneath strings of softly glowing lights. General Marcus Bennett remained long after the celebration had officially ended, helping fold tables, carry empty boxes, and thank every volunteer who had made the retirement ceremony possible. To those who had known him for decades, nothing about his willingness to stay behind seemed unusual. Leadership had never been something he reserved for conference rooms or military ceremonies. It appeared in ordinary moments, when no cameras were present and no recognition was expected. Retired Sergeant First Class Thomas Walker stood beside him, watching the final American flag being carefully folded before placing a hand on Marcus's shoulder. He quietly admitted that after more than 30 years in uniform, the greatest gift of the day had not been the speeches, the applause, or the medals displayed throughout the afternoon. It had been seeing an old friend arrive despite every unexpected obstacle and still choose kindness over frustration. Marcus smiled and answered that promises were easiest to make when life was comfortable, but they only gained real meaning when circumstances became difficult. Nearby, Officer Daniel Harper and Officer Ethan Brooks approached one final time before leaving for the evening. Harper explained that the department had already begun discussing additional training focused on communication, respectful interactions, and recognizing unconscious assumptions before they influenced professional judgment. He admitted that the experience had challenged him in ways no classroom exercise ever had. Marcus thanked him sincerely and replied that growth always began with the willingness to learn rather than the desire to defend past decisions. Brooks quietly added that he would never again overlook the small details that revealed discipline, humility, and character long before official titles became known. Marcus nodded, gently holding the worn challenge coin in his hand before placing it back inside his wallet. He explained that the coin itself carried no power. Its true value came from the people who remembered the sacrifices, integrity, and trust it represented. As the police officers departed, the atmosphere felt completely different from the uncertainty that had marked the beginning of the day. Respect had replaced misunderstanding, conversation had replaced assumption, and everyone who witnessed the events carried home a lesson far greater than anyone had expected that morning. Before leaving Cedar Falls, Major General William Harlan quietly thanked Thomas Walker for his lifetime of service and wished him a meaningful retirement surrounded by family and friends. Without ceremony, the government vehicles departed, blending naturally into the evening traffic. Marcus climbed into the same aging pickup truck that had first entered town unnoticed only hours earlier. He drove away without an escort, without special attention, and without asking anyone to remember his rank. The quiet streets gradually returned to normal, yet the story of that remarkable Saturday continued spreading through the community because people realized they had witnessed something far more important than a military protocol. They had witnessed the difference between authority and character. Weeks later, new officers joining the Cedar Falls Police Department would hear about the day a calm visitor taught experienced professionals that respect should always come before assumptions. Veterans who attended Thomas Walker's retirement would remember not the misunderstanding itself, but the dignity with which it had been resolved. And General Marcus Bennett continued serving exactly as he always had, believing that the strongest leaders never needed the world to recognize who they were before choosing to treat every person with patience, fairness, and honor. In the end, everyone discovered a truth that would outlast every title, every uniform, and every salute because real greatness is never announced by rank. It is revealed by the way a person chooses to respect others long before receiving respect in return.